Oliver declaring that he couldn't die just yet, and that their fallen comrades would scream from their graves, the ones who had died because of Oliver. Oliver called his name, but before he could continue speaking, Kyril stabbed him. Surprising Oliver with his dying breath, he called Kyril his comrade and asked how it had come to this. Then Oliver collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Kyril addressed the dead Oliver, questioning how he could claim they were comrades, accusing him of maintaining a pretentious act. RMC Kyril McGyver was a man who had led countless wars to victory, bearing the title of Sword Saint and serving as the guardian of the Empire, but now, on this day, Kyril McGyver had become a traitor who had slain the Emperor. The soldiers discovered him, branding him a traitor, and charged towards him to end his life. Someone behind him stated that he had become a traitor to the Empire. This person was Nard Dimog, the Platinum Dragon. For 10 years during the Divine War, humanity fought against the dreadful corruption. The 10 of them, including Kyril, risked their lives fighting for the Emperor. However, upon returning to their homeland after the horrific war, they were not greeted with warmth, but with death. All of Kyril's comrades had been brutally killed by the Emperor's hand. Kyril believed that if he could change everything, he would even go to hell. Nardi asked him what he would do now with his comrades and the Emperor dead. He questioned whether Kyril would face his own demise just like that. Nardi also pointed out that history would remember Kyril as a traitor who eventually betrayed the Emperor, someone who accepted dirty immigrants from the north, but the truth would remain hidden. It was the Emperor who had tried to assassinate the great sword Saint Kyril McGyver, betrayed by the person he had risked his life to protect. Kyril furiously demanded answers from Oliver, the Emperor. He reminded Nardi that he had asked him earlier what he would do, and Kyril's response was that he would return to the past to achieve this. He was heading to the tower. Feral Nardi sincerely asked Kyril if he was truly planning to go back to the past. Kyril arrived at Feral, a place shrouded in death, but also offering a second chance. Nardi acknowledged that even he, a dragon, couldn't predict what lay inside, and that Kyril might have to face creatures more fearsome than the monsters of the divine trust. Even as a sword Saint, Kyril couldn't guarantee that he would reach the end. However, one thing was certain: if Kyril reached the top of Feral, he could return to the past. Nard I asked Kyril if he was truly committed to taking that path. Kyril reached the light at the top of Feral and slowly entered it, responding with a resolute yes to Nardi's question, as it was the only path left for him. Now he declared that he would rectify his twisted fate with his own hands and survive. After surviving, he would undoubtedly return to the past, cutting down everything in his way, overcoming challenges and continuing to do so. He vowed to crawl up that hellish tower, even if his body crumbled, and even if it took an eternity to turn the tables. He promised that he would unquestionably return back to before it all began, to the point where he could change the future. His past self welcomed him, and then he noticed shining clocks. Suddenly someone called his name, awakening him. He looked around, wondering where he was, and glanced at his hands. When someone asked if he was nervous, the man reassured him, and he was surprised to see his father's face, as he had been certain he was in Feral. He looked out of the carriage window and was astonished to realize that he was experiencing the moments he had longed to see again, and the landscapes he had missed dearly beyond the constraints of time's hellish grip. He was relieved that he had finally returned, presumably to the time when he had been adopted as a child by his father Cruel. He was ecstatic that he had safely returned before the Divine War commenced. Cruel acknowledged that leaving his homeland must have been nerve-wracking and offered to help him settle into their home. He asked Kyril if there was anything he wanted to do. Kai pondered what it was he wanted to do, and then realized that it wasn't just a desire, but an obligation for his fallen brothers and followers who had died unjustly, and for the fate that had been betrayed. Knowing that he possessed the power to change the future, he told his father that he wanted to learn magic. Cruel was confused, stating that as an immigrant he knew Kyril couldn't use magic. Kyril replied affirmatively, explaining that was precisely why he needed it more. He believed that swordsmanship alone would not be enough. With a bloody war on the verge of erupting, he had to ascend to the pinnacle of power not only with his sword but also with magic. He vowed not to repeat the failures of his past life. Clenching his fist, he declared that the god of Eula should watch him closely. Confidently, he believed that he would unquestionably change the future crew. We'll ask Kyril if he knew that immigrants were born without magic. Kyril McGyver, a commander of the Empires, Blue Knights and one of the only 5 swordmasters on the continent, told Kyril that he must want to take revenge on him. Under the Emperor's Edict of Heresy, he revealed that he was the one who killed Kyril's triumph and his father. Kyril will explain that he had taken Kyril, and because he recognized him as a great warrior, a child of Kaliak. Loosening his necktie, Kyril told Kyril that perhaps his anger towards him would make him stronger, and he challenged Kyril to prove it to him. He reminded Kyril that he was the one who had taken him in the McGyver family, and that Kyril should show him the talent he inherited from his father. They arrived at McGyver Palace, and Kyril instructed Kyril to follow him. They were met by 5 men, and Kyril will explain that they would be Kyril's new brothers. He introduced McGyver as the eldest and only biological son among McGyver's children who had died miserably during the Divine War in the past. Kyril shook Mart's hand, introducing himself as Kyril. As Kyril walked upstairs, he mentioned that Kyril must be tired from the journey and offered to show him to his room. They remained silent for a moment, and the other 2 men introduced themselves as Elliot and Jake. Seeing their faces reminded Kyril of the time when they had also died to the divine. Clenching his hand, he made a firm resolution that he would change their fates and prevent their deaths. With determination, he walked upstairs to alter the future that had been foretold. Later, the siblings trained together. While discussing what the new guy Kyril was doing, one of them remarked that Kyril seemed to be exploring the mansion and asked the others for their thoughts. Tyron overheard them mentioning that he was an immigrant while Elliot was training with Mart. He expressed his concerns about Kyril, questioning whether bringing an immigrant into the family was too much, and if it defied the Emperor's command to kill the enemy. Mark told Elliot that he was overthinking things, and they resumed their training. During the training, Mart surprised Elliot by launching a sudden attack and managing to disarm him. Pointing his sword near Elliot's neck, Mart told him that they were all in the same boat and reminded him that Kyril was their youngest brother. Elliot realized that Mart truly considered them brothers, even accepting immigrants, and believed that Mart was the true heir of their family. Their other brothers expressed their reservations about Kyril being an immigrant, but Mart replied that they would have to see if saving Kyril was more valuable than obeying the Emperor's edict. One of the brothers speculated that their father would not include Kyril in the succession. Mart handed his sword to Elliot, dismissing the idea and telling him to stop thinking and start training. Just then Kyril arrived, and Mart was surprised to see him glaring at him. He wondered if Kyril was trying to provoke him. Mart asked Kyril if he knew how to use a sword, mentioning the rumors he had heard about immigrants from the north tearing people apart with their hands. Wart challenged Kyril to give it a try instead of just watching, and Kyril responded that he would be glad to and would be happy to respond if Mart was serious. Elliot thought that Kyril was a crazy bastard and wondered why he was provoking their older brother. The other brother was also angry and questioned if Kyril had come there just to cause trouble. Mart was momentarily speechless, but then angrily threw a sword toward Kyril. Kyril caught it and agreed to the challenge. Mart pointed his sword at Kyril, stating that whether he liked it or not, Kyril would have to live there, and as his elder brother Mark would teach him the laws of the Empire. Kyril realized that it was the mana blade and smiled, realizing that Mart had fallen for such a petty provocation. The plan he had formulated while climbing Pharaoh for an eternity in the first step you'll take to change the future is Mart McGyver. Mart furiously attacked him, but he swiftly blocked the attack with his sword, causing them both to retreat. He couldn't help but be impressed by Mart's skills as an heir to the prestigious McGyver house. Mart's abilities were unquestionable, however. He remained confident that Mart's lack of real Combat experience would be his downfall. He had no choice, but to make Mart understand this, he warned Mark that if he didn't make the first move, he would. Wart's anger flared, and he charged toward him, hurling insults at him. Mart swung his sword, but once again he skillfully parried the attack. Upon closer inspection, he noticed weaknesses in Mart's technique. Despite his initial speed and sharpness, retreating his sword, he launched a punch toward Mart, catching him off guard. The blow landed squarely on Mart's face, causing him to drop his sword. He knew that ultimately Mart's lack of combat experience couldn't be overcome. Mart fell to the ground in pain, and Elliot, worried for his brother, attempted to attack him. However, Mart stopped Elliot and instructed him to stay put, extending his hand to help Mart. He acknowledged that Mart was intelligent and must have realized his shortcomings. Mart, however, swatted his hand away, claiming that he had learned a lot. He understood that Mart was someone he needed. Suddenly, a noise interrupted their training session. Mart immediately turned around upon recognizing the voice. It was Kyril, who declared that training was over for the day, instructing everyone to return to their rooms. They all acknowledged his order and began to disperse. As he made his way to leave, Kyril all called his name, advising him not to visit the training ground for the time being. He smiled in response, stating that he would do as he pleased. The scene shifts to another man commented to Kyril that he seemed to have brought a troublesome individual. Kyril explained that it was precisely why he had separated him from the other children, and he believed that Kyril would adjust eventually. He revealed that Kyril was the child of Kali, the chieftain of the Black Eye tribe, emphasizing that a lion doesn't give birth to a kitten. Curious, Kyril asked the man for his opinion of Kyril. The man responded, praising Kyril is a true child of the Black Eye tribe, known for their exceptional swordsmanship. He possessed a sturdy skeleton, flexibility, and even the distinctive rhythm of the tribal warriors. The man believed that if anyone were born for the sword, it would be Kyril. Kyril mentioned that if Kyril were an Imperial, he would likely have claimed the title of youngest swordmaster. Meanwhile, in his room, he knew that Kyril would be leaving for the Imperial Palace in a week. Glancing at his reflection in the window mirror, he realized it was his only opportunity. He remembered Narda's words expressing surprise at how a mere human like him could handle a sword so well. Nardi had believed that he might even surpass his father soon. Regrettably, if only he had known earlier that he was a member of the McGyver house, he could have acquired magical powers with Narda's help. Grateful to Nardi for opening up a path he couldn't access before, he was determined to make the handup's fate that Nardi had taught him his own. The following day, Lady Isabel Escher, Kryril's wife, confronted him, angrily questioning whether it was true that an immigrant child without any magical bloodline wished to learn magic. She worried that Kyril might have ulterior motives, suspecting that he knew her family had a long lineage of mages. He assured her that this was not the case, reminding her of the past when he was aided by Kali. He emphasized that Kyril was the son of his friend Kali, and if Kyril desired to learn, the least they could do was not hinder him. He viewed it as a courtesy to Kali, even though he understood it was an impossible task. Later, they gathered around the long table for a meal. Lady Isabel addressed him directly, confirming that he was Kyril, and expressed surprise that he wished to learn magic as reported by the Count. This revelation startled Elliot and Mart. Elliot questioned whether it was even possible for an immigrant to learn magic, while Mart scoffed at the idea, believing Kyril had lost his mind. Kyril retorted that it wasn't about learning but understanding magic. Lady Isabel inquired about Kyril's motives, and he understood that he needed to make his presence known and prove his worth to his father. He realized that what mattered to him now was earning his father's recognition, even though it was something they would never openly discuss. The answer his father truly sought, he boldly proclaimed his desire to surpass everyone at the table, causing them all to be taken aback. Mart, fuming with anger, questioned what he had just said. The group turned their attention to their father, awaiting his response. Kyril told him that it was quite the response, and asked him if does that everyone include him, to which he nodded in agreement. Mart stand up furiously, calling him Insolent but cruel shouted that it was enough. Crew will acknowledge Kyril's desire to surpass him not only in magic, but also in swordsmanship. He questioned whether Kyril understood the implications of his words, to which Kyril responded with a firm affirmation. Cruel smiled proudly, remarking that Kyril's audacity aligned perfectly with the spirit of the McGyver house. He informed Kyril that the McGyver house possessed the library called Inari Housing Books on magic. He encouraged Kyril to feel free to read them, much to Lady Isabel's dismay. However, Kyril thanked his stepfather, appreciative of the opportunity. Later, inside Inari, he read the books and realized that there was little of value to be found. He questioned whether Cruel truly believed that he could master magic merely by reading these books. He pondered whether Cruel was playing a prank on him, but he recognized that a prank wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. Although he had treated Honorary lightly in the past, he knew that within its walls lay the key to his reincarnation. The heart of the dragon, possessing it would grant him access to magic, a power he sought. Then he suddenly remembered that he had asked Nardi how to obtain the power of reincarnation. Nardi had replied that he needed to consume the heart of a dragon. Pointing at Nardi, he asked if he meant his own heart, which caught Nard by surprise. Nard I questioned whether he thought he was crazy enough to give away his own heart. He explained that Terrain Karn, it had to be done before the age of 15, and for someone as old as him, trying to become a hero would be pointless. However, he mentioned that if he could go back in time, things might be different. Fortunately, he had been adopted into the Mageva family, where a hidden dragon's heart was rumored to lie. He shared the information that the only place to find a dragon's heart was in Inuri. Determined, he clenched his hand and promised Nardi that he would make good use of it. A week later, Cruel asked a man if Kyril was still spending time in the mansion's backyard. The man replied that it seemed like Kyril was training, but not in swordsmanship. He mentioned that it had already been a week, and he thought Kyril would be buried in the library, which struck him as strange. The man added that they were running very late, and the knights were waiting at the routine fortress. He warned Cruel that if they delayed any longer, even the Emperor would be angry. Cruel reluctantly acknowledged this and ordered the man to bring him to the fortress. Meanwhile, at night, Kyril engaged in imaginary battles against imaginary foes. He conjured a shadow person and dodged its attacks, but he couldn't move any faster. He wondered if it was because he was still a child. The shadow sword struck his chest, and he realized he still couldn't replicate the movements from the tower. He noticed that the environment in this place was different from the tower. Nevertheless, he knew he needed to recreate it and regain the sensation to reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship. However, he also understood that there was no need to rush, because the experience he gained in the tower wouldn't disappear, and building his body was more urgent. Suddenly, someone called out to him, reporting that the butler was there. The man informed him that the master had called for him. Kyril clenched his hand, relieved that Cruel had finally called him. A few minutes later, he arrived at Cruel's office. Pyro mentioned that he heard he was called, and Cruel asked him to sit down. Cruel inquired about the peculiar training Cairo had been doing. Cairo replied that he was simply working on building his body. Cruel then informed him that the next day they would be leaving for the Imperial Palace, and Kyril would have to leave the mansion for a while. He handed a sword to Kyril, explaining that it was a relic his father had left for him. Cruel remarked that he thought Kyril would have spent more time in the library by now, and asked if he wasn't curious. Kyril replied that he just didn't think the time was right yet, but the truth is that he had been waiting for Cruel to leave the mansion before exploring the library. The next day, Elliot called Kyril an unlucky fool and wondered if Kyril believed he had become something special. One of his brothers cautioned Elliot to be careful with his words, since is also a noble. Elliot argued that he had witnessed what the master did to Kyril, and after Cruel left the palace, Kyril locked himself in the library. Mart understood Elliot's dissatisfaction, but advised him to keep it moderate. Bart knew that their other brothers were accustomed to fighting, so they might share Elliot's sentiments. He wondered if the bookworm Tyron felt the same. Mart turned to Tyron and asked for his opinion. Tyron replied by questioning whether Kyril knew that Mono was the condensed energy of the body and the external world. Tyron explained that one needed mana within their body to gather it, but Kyril and other immigrants didn't possess what was called mana blood. He clarified that it wasn't a matter of whether they could learn magic or not. Tyron believed that it was impossible for someone who couldn't even sense mana to understand the structure of magic, but he predicted that Cairo would give up in a few days. Meanwhile, in Hinari, Cairo recalled that the mansion belonged to the McGyvers, but was not built by them. Both the mansion and the library had been constructed by the Escher family. Kayashir, the great magician who had laid the foundation of the empire 250 years ago and was the first dragon hunter, had hidden the heart of a dragon in Einari. However, nobody had been able to uncover the secret of Einari, or rather nobody had been able to understand Kayashir's twisted personality. Kyril realized that Kai had created a barrier with an absurd condition. The more he investigated, the more amazing it became. He noticed that all the books that were related to the Edict of Heresy from 250 years ago. He reached out and pulled one of the books, and suddenly the bookshelf shifted, revealing a hidden door. He had found it. Standing before the door, he knew that Kai had designed it so that only those without mana could find it, and he had made it undetectable by the citizens right in the middle of the empire, so it could survive all that time. With anticipation, he twisted the doorknob, acknowledging Kai as an incredible human who had been recognized by the dragons. It was said that your great magician, if you had managed to open 8 out of the 12 mana points in body, but Kai opened 9. Even so, Kai can't compare to a dragon, and no matter how amazing he is, a human can only have one attribute. Then he saw a small chest inside, knowing that the heart of a dragon contains all attributes. If by some chance a human consumes it before turning 15, and if they can absorb the power within the dragon's heart. Kyril made a bold decision and placed the dragon's heart in his mouth and swallowed it, fully aware that the act itself was a gamble, and surviving after consuming a dragon's heart would be nothing short of a miracle. The pain surged through his body, and he found himself coughing up blood. Realizing the magnitude of the risk he had taken in that moment, he understood that it would be best to abandon any what-if thoughts. The power contained within the dragon's heart was simply not meant for humans to handle. He slowly faded as he entered an unfamiliar place. Looking around in wonder, he strained to hear voices, but they were muffled and unclear. Turning back, he heard someone say, "At last we meet," and addressed him as Lyceria. He saw Kai standing behind him. The dragon called Kaya Despicable One, and he realized that it wasn't his voice, but rather the residual memory of dragon Lyceria in his heart. Lyceria asked Kai why he hunted dragons when they were of the same kind. Kai replied that she talked too much and asked if she could see her end. Furious, Lyceria told him to shut up and attacked him with fire. He was astonished by Lyceria's immense power as the fire engulfed Kai, but Lyceria continued to burn him in anger. Realizing that they wouldn't survive such a powerful fire breath, he wondered how Kai managed to slay the dragon. Then he noticed Kai still standing unscathed, holding a swarm of arrows in the air. Kai said ignite, and his arrow burst into flames. The fiery arrows flew towards Lyceria. Surprising her, she wondered why Kai was using a first-class magic spell against a dragon. The arrows hit Lyceria, causing the dragon to roar loudly in pain. He felt the same pain as well. Realizing that Lyceria's agony was directly transmitted to him, he pondered if this was what it meant to face death, but reminded himself that he was the one who had survived the Tower of Trials. He resolved to endure and overcome the attacks that had killed the dragon, knowing he would absorb its heart. Lyceria told Kai that she saw the logic no longer applied, accusing him of pouring 5th-class magic into a 1st-class spell. She then asked him if her death would bring him a fresh start. Kai confidently replied of course, but added that his magic would end with him. With that, he burned Lyceria to death, understanding that both her essence and his were right there. Later, he opened his eyes and let out a painful groan. The server anxiously asked if he was conscious and if he knew who he was. The Server said they would inform the lady immediately. He glanced at his hand, feeling the power coursing through him. However, he stopped the server from informing the lady, requesting some time alone. The server looked back in confusion and tried to protest, but he insisted that he would inform her himself when he was feeling better. Eventually, the server complied and left. He observed a mark on his hand and realized that it represented an unimaginable power, magical power. He knew his plan was about to unfold later. The server advised him to rest more, mentioning that if Jake hadn't found him, it would have been a disaster. He knew that Jake was his fifth brother and not particularly interested in martial arts, so his fascination with the library was not surprising. Expressing gratitude, he asked the server how many days he had been unconscious. The server replied a week. Surprising him, he inquired if anyone had come to see him, and the server confirmed that someone from the palace had visited, though unsure of the reason. He recalled that the royal family usually sent an edict to McGyver once a quarter, unless there was a special circumstance. He realized that something important must have happened during his time of rest, causing him to miss it. He assured the server that he understood and instructed him to leave. He believed it was best to keep his recovery a secret for now and avoid attracting his brother's attention. He then considered the magic power that had settled in his body and pondered how to wield it. Activating it, he commanded it to move, and his magic power complied, confirming that he had indeed gained magical abilities. Amazed, he looked at his hand, realizing that the immense magic power he possessed couldn't be compared to that of an ordinary magician. The power of a dragon was truly incredible. However, suddenly he felt a searing pain and coughed, slowly collapsing to the floor. He desperately tried to halt his descent, but failed. Recognizing that his mana veins had stopped opening with determination, he shakily stood up. Knowing that out of 12 veins only 2 had opened, he realized he needed to open 10 more. Standing firm, as if he hadn't just experienced pain, he told Eula to wait for him, because his journey was beginning now. He took a deep breath to calm himself down, realizing that the overwhelming magic power within him was on the verge of overflowing. He understood that his body's blood veins were unable to handle it, and if he couldn't control the surging magic, it would eventually lead to a catastrophic explosion. Realizing he needed a weapon capable of containing that immense power, he looked at the sword given to him by Kyril. He knew that it was an impossible task for a human, as the blood veins alone couldn't handle it, but he reached for the sword named Agnel, his real father's legacy. Pulling it out from its shelf, he activated his magic towards it, knowing it was a weapon of the immigrants capable of withstanding such magic. A smile formed on his face as he proudly believed that these conditions were enough to lay the groundwork later. Within the forest, he gathered his magic power and swung the sword at the trees in front of him, effortlessly breaking them in half. Looking at his sword, he understood that it wasn't on par with the mana blades of the Imperials. Instead, it held the pure magic of a dragon, devoid of any attributes on a blade in the past. Those who could infuse use fourth-class magic into a mana blade and reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship were called sword masters. Those who reached the pinnacle of the sword called him a sword saint. Even after he couldn't use the mana blade, he wondered how they would react if they saw him now. Suddenly he coughed and felt a sharp pain coursing through his body. He knelt to the ground, realizing that even by briefly using magic, the pain was excruciating. It became evident to him that he couldn't freely wield his magic with just 2 blood veins opened. He knew he needed to find a way to stabilize his blood veins. Determined, he stood up, understanding that until he opened 10 more blood veins, he would remain a half-baked existence. Despite his unease, there was nothing particularly noticeable. No matter how much he searched Ainari, he knew Kai had hidden something there, preventing anyone from finding it. The fact that the dragon's heart had been concealed there implied the presence of something else hidden within Ainari. All he could do was continue searching through Ainari. Suddenly, a server called out to him in a panic, and he smiled, knowing that it seemed the incident was about to unfold. What needed to happen always happened. Later, all the siblings faced their mother Isabel as Martin informed her that everyone had gathered Tyron, and Elliot glared at him furiously, wondering why the immigrant who had never shown his face before was also present. Tyron considered him shameless, while Elliot thought he had survived against all odds, but he didn't concern himself with their opinions. Isabel unrolled the scroll announcing that she had called them together to deliver an important message. She read aloud that as they were aware the harvest season was approaching, and in line with tradition the royal family had ordered goblin extermination. However, there was a special edition support from the royal family. Isabel explained that in recognition of the McGyver family's use of mercenaries during the heresy extermination decree, the royal family had decided to send support troops. Tyron commented to Mart that it was the first time they were receiving such support, and Mart agreed, acknowledging the assistance would be beneficial during the extermination. However, Elliot voiced his doubts to his mother, stating that something felt strange. He questioned if it wasn't the royal family who called for mercenaries due to the shortage of soldiers for the immigrant extermination. He glanced back at him, suggesting that they should be increasing their troops for the immigrant extermination instead of focusing on monsters. Elliot's directness didn't go unnoticed. Isabel tried to reassure them, saying that the support troops are coming from the Balsar family, making Tyron surprised. After much deliberation, their mother finally informed them that they shouldn't overthink it, but he knew it was a calculated attack specifically targeting the McGyver family, and in 5 days Randall McGyver would meet his demise. The battle was set to take place in 5 days, high above the forest, down a narrow path with no possibility of retreat. His brothers fell into an ambush laid by those lying in wait. The ambush had been meticulously planned, taking advantage of their annual monster extermination. Randall lost his life then and there, but he was confident that he could now defend against such an attack.